Hi everyone, welcome back to Be Rich. As promised, I have Shashwat back with me. We're recording remotely, as always. There was an interesting article which I chanced upon. It came in Economic Times Business Standard, was splashed all over the Indian media about our dear Larry Summers, and he was in India, and he had given some glowing reports about India and India's future. Some of it may be true, some of it may not be true, and I don't know where the truth lies. So I thought I'll get my resident advisor and chief economist, Mr. Shashwat, to take it apart for me and say where he thinks there's merit and where he doesn't see merit in what was covered in the media. Please remember, what me and Shashwat are reading are not the actual text. What we're reading is the reporter's interpretation of what Larry had shared. If we do chance upon the actual text or the video, we will do another deep dive into that separately. So, without wasting any time, Shashwat, so what did you think of that article?
So Larry Summers makes a few points, some of which I agree with, some of which not that I disagree with. I just find it a little doubtful because I feel like it's unsubstantiated. But Summers talks about China first, and of course, it's something which we've talked about on this channel. Some of our viewers might find it a little saturating that we keep talking about China, but given what's happening, China, the US, Russia, India, these are topics which we have to cover. So let's do what we must. So when Larry Summers talks about China, he basically talks about their overcapacity in their production. So he says overcapacity because he thinks that China has mostly gone past the limit on which they should be building infrastructure. And he thinks that they have suppressed consumption in the Chinese economy for too long. They've been promoting a production oriented growth and they have been suppressing consumption. And he thinks that the time has come where the scales need to be tipped in terms of consumption versus production. And he thinks that the Chinese economy and people in China should start consuming more. If they don't, he believes that Chinese growth is going to be muted in the future. And he says that not only is Chinese growth going to be muted, but he also is concerned for the global economy because he says that if China doesn't start consuming more, it is going to hamper the global economy because they're going to continue investing to stay competitive on the in the export scene. And if they keep doing that, they're going to do it at the cost of their own people, that is to their own detriment, and two, they're going to do it to the detriment of others in the world because them investing so heavily in competitive trade practices has basically meant that other countries are now growing impatient with China's economic policies, and they're starting to call for tariffs to be placed. And these tariffs are basically what Donald Trump has bandied about, which is basically that your people are starting to see that another economy is subsidizing a lot of the goods which are coming in and you're not so competitive. And of course there's this easy ability to villainize that economy and the people of that economy and say they're the reason why I am suffering so much. Well, Larry Summers takes a balanced approach. He says that it was good for a while that they were doing it, and tariffs are not a great idea. He says that it's misguided. Yes, there is a problem. People need employment, but tariffs are not the way you're going to bring in employment into the US. So he says that you first need to only bring in tariffs where it's important to your own national defense or national security. That makes sense. And he says that apart from that, it's okay. If China wants to subsidize your consumption in the US, that's fine by me, in the sense that if China is going to keep subsidizing its producers to keep bringing down the cost of goods, that's just artificially pushing down your cost of consumption. So you are getting a free meal basically today because China wants to compete with economies when its equilibrium price is not at that point yet. That's one thing which Larry Summers talks about. And he says that in this scenario, India has a big role to play. And he thinks that India, if it follows a pattern of growth which focuses on services and it focuses on construction jobs, it's going to do well. And India will be able to push ahead in terms of growth. And he believes that by the end of a century of independence, India should have 6 times growth from where it started. And he thinks that India will be able to push ahead in terms of growth in the next 5 years, 10 years, as well as the next generation, according to Summers. And he thinks that the Modi government has been instrumental in creating physical infrastructure capacities in India and pushing an orientation towards manufacturing and the secondary sector rather than the primary or tertiary sector. Tertiary being services, primary being agriculture, secondary being manufacturing. So, given these points, Larry Summers thinks that India has done a lot so far and India has more to achieve in the future. So, this is what he talks about mainly in the article. Then he discusses the IMF, but I don't think it's so relevant to this conversation per se. So, yeah.
Yeah. So what he basically is trying to say is India has an opportunity because of what is happening to China, and because of that, we can steam ahead. Our economy can steam ahead. Couple of things he says is true. If we leave all the politics and colorings outside, couple of things he says is true. We are a pluralistic country. We are a democracy, and rule of law works here, which are all big pluses for India as far as it's concerned. Yes, it's not perfect. I'm not claiming to be perfect, but it does work up to an extent. And that is a big plus for India. And the reason why that's a big plus for India is because of democracy and ideological alignments with Western powers when it comes to this. Countries would find us too easy to understand Indian viewpoints. We find their viewpoints easy to understand. And it kind of aligns when investment comes in that we share a lot of cultural ideology when it comes to this. Now, the other thing which we have a great advantage of is our domestic consumption is much higher than what China is or was at the time. Indians do consume a lot, and we can see that very apparent in the way our businesses, our earnings have improved, especially our consuming companies like ITC and Tata Consumers and Trent. If you look at this, even Titan, if you look at these companies, even our paint companies, Asian Paints, you look at all of them, all their earnings have been ticking upwards, especially post-pandemic. But it is not all rosy pictures. There is a lot of problems in the Indian economy which need to be addressed. So the potentiality is there, and we do have a great platform because of things which we have happened to have done and the way the global situation right now is unfolding. At the same time, I do feel we need to really implement these things more than planning them. I think some of it is not really, it's still in the planning stages. It's not actually been implemented. What is your take on this, Shashwat?
Well, I'll just say that I agree with his musings on China. I think that he's right to point out that China has been under consuming for quite a while, and I do think that yes, China has been pushing artificial growth by basically pushing down the value of their currency. This is something which every economy, almost any big economy, has accused China of doing, of pushing their capital account deficit quite a bit and then causing that to balance off their trade surplus, so that doesn't have an impact on their currency, so the currency doesn't become more expensive. So if their currency becomes more expensive, that means the goods they're trying to export or put out to the world becomes more expensive in terms of the other countries trying to buy it. But by actively investing heavily in other countries, they push down the value of their currency by inflating their capital account deficit and thereby making the currency value go down against the dollar and other major currencies in the world, therefore pushing up their consumption, pushing down their own consumption. And they're using a lot of the money to also build infrastructure in China. And this has basically meant that a lot of the Chinese people have not been able to consume much, which I agree with, and that's completely valid. I don't know how this is going to. I mean, he hypothesizes that China might have hit a wall in terms of how much more infrastructure, the returns from infrastructure they can gain. Because he is right, the population is declining. And he didn't explicitly state that the Chinese population is declining. But I think that might be part of the rationale because you're going to build so much infrastructure, but you need people to use that infrastructure. So that's one point. And I also think that he might be right in the sense that China has been cracking down on unions and basically making sure that their working population doesn't have much bargaining rights to get to secure a higher wage. And all this is true. But I find it a little hard to believe that when you have a declining population, investing in
Hmm.
technology infrastructures doesn't make sense, because I think it does make sense. You need to push up your labor productivity in order for you to compensate this lack of workforce to maintain what your current output is. I mean, it's a simple economics concept. You basically have a certain level of production you're doing with like 80% labor, 20% technology. Now that your labor is coming down, you need to push up the technology component to be able to still produce the amount of goods you were producing before. So I think from that standpoint, I think China has a lot more to achieve through technology infrastructure than what it currently is doing, because it has been relying on cheap manpower for a lot of time. So that's one thing.
And another thing he has not spoken about is the latest stimulus from the Chinese government, where they have made it easy to borrow again against property. They allow you to refinance your loans. So it sent the Chinese stock exchange into a tizzy. FIs have been pulling money out of India and they've been running to Chinese. And there's been a little bit of a pause in the last few days about that. But still, we have to wait and watch as far as China is concerned. I don't agree with the stimulus plan they're doing. I don't think the stimulus plan is the right way for them, because what they're doing is they're making it borrowing it cheaper, and they're making, if you're an existing loans, they're trying to refinance it and polish it up is what I feel. I don't know. What's your take on that?
I mean, to be fair, I think that the Chinese people need some sort of relief. Unless they get some sort of relief, the Chinese economy is going to tank. I do agree that the way they're going about it could be much better. I mean, in the sense that you could implement a better stimulus policy, but I'm just glad that they pushed away from
Are
the
doing
stance.
something.
Yeah, I'm glad that they pushed away from the stance of saying we're not going to do anything. Whoever suffers suffers, and they basically villainize the people who got caught in the property crisis. And now they're peddling back and saying that, okay, maybe they're not villains, they just had good intentions, but they got caught during the wrong moment, and they're trying to basically bail these guys out. And I think to some extent that some relief is required to make sure that your economy is continuing to produce something, because otherwise you would go into a
True.
deep decline. So I
Okay.
think from that angle, it's something which is a welcome development, that they're actually trying to create some sort of balance. But another point which I wanted to bring up with what Larry Summers was talking about services, yes, I agree. Raghuram Rajan has also talked about the push for services, and I'm pretty sure Rajan and Summers are quite good friends.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but what I don't sort of see where he's coming from is when he talks about construction jobs pushing up value in India, because we have enough property sitting idle with basically no one to consume them. Maybe he means construction in terms of public infrastructure. Maybe that could be it, but I don't know exactly what he means by construction. Do you have any ideas
No,
on
I
where he?
think I agree with you on this. I think he means public infrastructure, like metros, better roads, better transportation network, logistic networks, building more ports, airports. Those are all huge construction projects which require IMF, World Bank investment and money to come in. I don't think he's talking about housing and building more IT parks. He's talking about, really large infrastructure projects in India, and those kind of projects can create wealth in terms of jobs. It can create economy of scale and give us opportunities to have the kind of infrastructure US created after World War II. After World War II, US had a launching pad because they had such a great domestic network and logistic network, and none of it was damaged during the world wars because US was so far away. They had a tremendous opportunity to leverage that, and that's what created the economy of scale for US. I think he means something similar that along those lines in India when he's talking about construction. What do you think?
Yeah, I think if he's talking about public infrastructure, then yes, that makes sense, because that is something which is being underfunded in India, and I think
Yes,
that is something which.
that's where you're right. When you said that, I think where the problem lies is, yes, potentiality is there, but potentiality is useless if you don't actually get down to doing action. And I think you should talk a little bit about where this idea can fail for India. what the government and people in India need to be careful about when it comes to this?
I mean, one thing is that we have to avoid making the mistake China did. Because China, when they
Yes.
pushed for public infrastructure, they basically pushed it for places which didn't need public infrastructure instead of actually
True.
doing the necessary projects. So you basically have ghost towns. But
Yes.
in India, you could very much make the same mistake unless you have a very focused effort. And another problem with India, at least I foresee, is that this is to come from the central government. Then they basically need to concede giving funding to state governments which aren't ruled by the same party. For example, let's say party X is in power in the center and party Y is in power in the state. What incentive does party X have to fund public infrastructure in
Yes,
party
China
Y?
does have an advantage on that. China doesn't suffer the problems of democracy. Problem
Yeah.
in democracy is what you rightly pointed out, where, there has to be work between both sides for things to happen. In Chinese, it's one policy from the center which is rolled out and everyone has to comply, no choice about it. Here, you're right. You know, states have to pick up, what they can do, and center also has to be a little more flexible and not trying to undermine development of the whole country because of local politics.
Yeah, because something which I've noticed, at least in my study of how the Indian economy has worked, it's always that the center has pursued policies which they can claim that brand their own name onto. And this is not just the current government; it's the past one and the one before that as well.
Very true.
It's something which, even if I was in power, I mean, God, I mean, that's not something I wish on my worst enemy. The natural human instinct would be to basically, do something which is going to bring me political dividends.
True.
That makes economic and political sense on the
No, this
individual.
is the same problem which is there in the US. The US has been in a lock between both the parties for a long time. I would say almost for 20 odd years since the Bush Clinton fiasco happened. From that time, that election has set off such divisions, so divisions in United States, where the holding on to your party and your ideology seems more important than working together, as a nation when moving forward. I do think you're right when it comes to this, and it is a big problem in democracies.
Yeah, and so basically on the public infrastructure front right now, I don't see much movement of the needle per se. I think that he's right. I think there may be a point to fund greater strategic public infrastructure.
Yeah, that was a funny thing when you said that also, because recently even RBI, Shaktikanta Das came out saying private sector should step in, where the government actually should be funding these things, saying private sector should step in and take on these huge projects, which kind of sounded really weird. That you expect central government to be building your airports and building railway network and doing things, while the Reserve Bank of India is coming out, which has really weird thing to come out and say,
Yeah,
which
it
speaks
is.
volumes.
I mean, I don't want to get into the efficacy of how much
Yeah.
we've. So let's
Yeah.
let's avoid that topic. But then
Yes.
something which we should talk about is that look at services in India, and he's basically saying that look, AI is coming in, and okay, it's this big scary word which everyone keeps using, AI. But what he's basically saying is that look, it's basically giving competition to the jobs which you have created thus far. So unless
Yes.
India is willing to navigate this current, I mean, we've just worked under the assumption that IT will do well in India no matter what. But now we do
Correct.
have a contender because if you want to do low level coding, AI is more than enough to do low level coding. Yes, bar some mistakes it does make logically, but any
Yes.
novice coder is enough to correct the mistakes AI makes.
No, it's progressively getting better.
Yeah, it's progressively getting better and they're iterating on it. So
Yeah.
if unless we start pushing up the skill level of the jobs which we're creating in services, it seems to me that we're at risk of being made redundant by AI. And I think that's a big risk which not a lot of people are talking about, especially for services in India. You have to be creating higher skilled jobs in services because services itself is seen as a high skilled job. But the kind of
True.
service we're doing, let's say making presentations or making very basic levels of coding, that's something which AI can do at a proficient level now, and I've tested it and it does tackle a lot of coding problems. So
True.
I think that this is something which we need to figure out, and the only way I see going forward is if you have to push education at the primary that is the school level, and you have to push healthcare, because these are the two things which we are currently underfunding and under allocating resources towards as a country. Because if you look at our education rates today, they're where the literacy rates of China was in the 90s. So what China had achieved, let's say 30 years ago, 35 years ago, is what we are standing today. And that's definitely something which is very depressing to hear.
No, I would also say it shows the potentiality also at the same time, Shashwat, because if we play our cards right, if we as a nation are able to overcome our differences and move forward and work, we have a great opportunity, like Larry Summers says. Meaning, if you had to bet on the Indian economy, it's a great time to bet on the Indian economy. I mean, if you're taking a position, it's a good position. If you do your due diligence correctly and you look at your valuations correctly, there are lots of companies in 30 years' time would be big powerhouses in the world. There's potential to become.
Yeah, I
Don't you
agree. I
think?
mean, it is my country after all. So it's something which I'm very optimistic about. And I'm hoping that by the time, I become, let's say, 40 or 50, I hope to see India as one of the leading superpowers of them. I mean, we are pretty much getting there. But I'd like to see India ranked among the ranks of, let's say, the US and other countries which today are viewed as like global superpowers and giants. So in that
I agree.
aspect, I'm quite hopeful. And for investors, I think you're right. I think that it makes a good opportunity because our population is hungry, we're ambitious, we want more, we want to do something with ourselves. And I think that's always a wonderful place to be, regardless of what the government does. The power is, of course, in the hands of the democracy and the people. And if the people, are hungry for more, like how the US was hungry after World War II, or how China was hungry in the 60s and 70s. I think there's definitely something which in the future, in terms of the economic performance for India, just because of this one fact.
Great. I think that's a wonderful note to end this video on. Those of you who have not read Larry Summers' piece, I mean, not piece, I mean, the interview, do go look in the Indian media. All of them have flashing it everywhere. So do read it. And we would love to hear your opinions about it, what you think on what he said, and what do you think about what me and Shashwat said. And do you agree with what we said? We'd love to read your comments. Do comment below. And me and Shashwat will see you in the next video soon. Do like and subscribe to this channel. Do share this with friends and families who might enjoy this kind of content. And anything else, Shashwat?
No, thank you for watching.
Yes, thank you for watching.
Hey guys, welcome back to Be Rich. Before we get into the video, I wanted to bring to your notice that my uncles Vinod Srinivasan, Anand Srinivasan and I have rolled out our Substack, which is basically a blog / newsletter where we're going to post our original research onto it. And we've analyzed macroeconomic trends. And a lot of you know my uncle Anand Srinivasan and I regularly write for The Hindu. And these articles are also going to be made available for you in the Substack. The link is moatinvesting.substack.com. You'll find it in the description and in the video right now. We hope you go check it out. We've put a lot of time and effort into it. And please give us comments and feedback on what you read. Thank you.
It's a great privilege and honor that so many of you in thousands have subscribed to my channel and have supported me. I have written 2 books in English, The Alchemy of Money and Ordinary Stocks, Extraordinary Profits. These books are published by us and are ready. If you want to procure a copy, send us a message to the WhatsApp number given below and my team would respond to you. If you want an Amazon Kindle copy, you can click the link below. Finally, those who wish to consult with me can send a mail to berichenglish@gmail.com. Once again, I thank you for your support. If you like this video, press the subscribe button of my channel, hit the like button and turn on the bell notification.